This is week 7, group 4. This is on the predictors of homelessness among families in New York City from Shelter Request to Housing Stability by Mary Beth Shin et al. Objectives. This study was conducted to examine predictors concerning entry into shelter and subsequent housing stability for a cohort of families receiving public assistance in New York City. The methods. The researchers interviewed 266 families as they requested shelter, and with a comparison sample of 298 families selected at random from the welfare caseload. Families with prior history of shelter were excluded from the follow-up study. The results were demographic characteristics and housing conditions were the most important risk factors for shelter entry. Enduring poverty and disruptive social experiences also contributed. 5 years later, 4/5 of the sheltered families had their own apartment. Conclusions. Housing subsidies are critical to ending homelessness among families. Families in New York City from Shelter Request to Housing Stability. Knowing why people are homeless will help us to help them return to conventional housing. One of the factors is increase in poverty. Homeless families have many characteristics associated with enduring poverty. Single parents, poor education, and dependence on welfare. Behavioral disorders, mental health issues, substance abuse, and case management to services to homeless individuals and families. Also, homeless adults and families have lower rates of mental illness and substance abuse than single individuals. They have higher rates than adults in poor families. Also, social ties, social isolation, element of hopelessness. People on the verge of homelessness often wear out their welcome with friends and family. And homeless adults report having been abused or separated from their families during childhood. Mothers in homeless families often suffered domestic violence. It's a two-edged sword. Substance abuse or domestic violence may lead to homelessness, but homelessness may actually exacerbate these issues. Ties to the housing market. Erosion of income and loss of inexpensive housing units led to a severe shortage of housing for the poor. Frequent moves, overcrowding, and poor building conditions are markers of tenuous ties. Own apartment if government subsidized, indicative of former ties. Or firmer ties, sorry. Demographics. Women in homeless families are younger and more likely to be from racial and ethnic minority groups. Homeless mothers are currently pregnant or had a recent birth. Also, stability is a factor. If homelessness is mostly a housing problem, then affordable housing should end the problem. Behavioral disorders, persistent poverty, or social ties are the problem, then providing housing would lead to long-term stability. The methods. It describes predictors of shelter requests and later housing stability for a cohort of New York City families initially interviewed in 1988 and followed up 4.85 years later. The eligible families, they were on welfare within the previous 6 months, had not been in a shelter in the previous 30 days, included children or a pregnant woman, and then the tables describe the variables of the measures. All in all, they came to the conclusion that, like I said, that in order to help these families, we need housing subsidies. We need to provide some stability for the families. And I think we need to look at the issues concerning these families a little more closely as a country, not just as um, a researcher, but to see the homeless mothers and the children. It seems to be perpetuated by poverty and by lower education standards. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks.